Hi everybody, Jeff here. I am here at Joe Glaser's guitar shop. Joe has a reputation here in Nashville of being maybe the greatest luthier in town. I hope it's okay that I say this. When I first came to Nashville, I asked a couple of guys who's the guy that I should go to get my instrument checked out and certain repairs done if I need it. Everybody said Joe Glaser. Glaser. Did I say
Glaser.
Glaser?
Yeah.
And so we met today and we're here, and this video is going to be about the basic setup principles I feel that all bass players can do without necessarily having to take the services of a guy like Mr. Glaser. Meaning that there's adjustment things that you can do to have an optimally set up instrument and find that it's something you could do at home. So I thought even before the lessons and even before doing anything, it would be a great idea to talk with a master of instrument repair and instrument adjustment, Joe Glaser, and from there see what he has to say about this. So Joe, thank you so much for allowing me to come in and meet you.
Privilege.
Thank you, buddy. I brought in my favorite bass. This is my Court bass, and having not really adjusted it recently, I moved it from Florida, and my action's a little off, and perhaps the bridge needs a little adjusting. I don't know. I thought I would just ask you, if I were a new bass player, what would I have to do in order to, let's say, maintain my instrument at home without any serious, work done on it? What could I do myself, or what would any young bass player do?
Now I'm going to tighten the truss rod.
Okay.
I'm going to use an Allen wrench,
Yes.
and it happens to be the one that fits, which is really important because if you use the wrong size, if it's almost the right size, it can easily strip out the nut, and then you're in really deep trouble.
Yes, sir.
Because you can't get that, you probably cannot get that nut loose. And so I put it in there, and I'm going clockwise. Clockwise means that when you're holding the tool in your hand and you're facing the watch, you're going the way the second hand's going to go. That's clockwise.
Yes.
Remove this string so I don't damage it. People say, well, is it a quarter turn? Is it an eighth turn? And no two truss rods work the same, and so I don't know the answer to that. It's just adjust and check. That's what you do. And the other thing, it never hurts to massage the neck a little bit because the truss rod may be in there with a little bit of friction, and it needs a little encouragement. And this is not moving very fast, so I'm going to put some more on there.
There's an expression I remembered I learned in the 1970s referring to the clockwise motion of a truss rod, whereby somebody would turn it to the right, as you say, with a clock, as a clock arm, the hands of the clock. It would be called righty-tighty, turning the hand of the clock to the right, righty-tighty, and lefty-loosey, which would be turning the hand of the clock counterclockwise, which would relieve the tension a little on the neck.
That's a really clever way to remember that. So now I've got this looking like exactly what I'd like it to look like. And I don't know if we can stick the camera up here and look down it. But if so, if you can just run down that line, you'll see that there's a little bit of curve. And similarly on the treble side, coming down this line, there's a little bit of curve. And beautifully on this bass, there's more curve on the bass side than the treble side, which is what you'd ideally like, because the action's higher, the attack's going to be greater, and the string's going to develop more of this elliptical shape. The other thing we want to do is take a really close look at the nut. This is the nut. The nut is basically the 0 fret, 3rd fret, 2nd fret, 1st 0, but with guides through it. So it's laying the strings in a certain order across the neck, but it is it's the 0 fret. So the nut's really an incredibly important and overlooked part of the bass or any instrument, because it affects not only the feel, but it affects the tuning. And too high is too high and will make an instrument play out of tune. Too low and it'll buzz open. When you play it in open position, all the strings will buzz on the first fret. So there happens to be a really easy way to tell exactly how high it needs to be.
Okay. I never knew that, by the way, about the nut.
People have all kinds of theories, but really it's very simple. It is simple because it is just an extension of the frets. And the frets are in a very tightly controlled line. In other words, their heights are very, very even. And so the nut needs to be just like that, except slightly higher. Slightly higher for a few reasons. One is that you don't want it to wear out and create problems immediately. Also, when you're playing behind a fret, you actually kind of raise the string over the next fret, and so you want to be able to simulate that. And also, when you're playing behind a fret, you are damping it. You're damping a fretted note, whereas an open note rings a little harder. So you want to give it a little more room. So the easiest way to know whether the nut is too high. Lots of people measure the nut right here, and they go, or they use a feeler gauge, and they go, okay, it's supposed to be X amount. And the problem with that is that gap changes depending on how you set your action.
Okay.
And there is, it's just not a valid way to do it. The real way to do it is, assuming you have a little bit of relief in the neck, and you can see that because when I hold it down at the 12th fret and the first fret, it clicks. And no matter how short I make that section, it clicks a little bit. And the shortest section possible is 3 frets. On the left side of one, on the right side of the other, and crossing the middle one in the middle. And there's just exactly 1,000th or 2 of clearance. And if you do that anywhere, you get the same effect. If you get all the way to the nut, this gap should not be considerably greater than that. And that's an incredibly sophisticated explanation of something that's very, very simple.
Okay, and how's my nut shaping up at this juncture?
Your low E is perfect. This is slightly higher than that.
Okay.
Your A is a little too high. Your D is a little too high. And so is your G. And we're not talking about very much, but since we're going through this, I'll just show you what we would do. This is probably not something somebody can do very easily at home.
Right.
But, and it's very easy to make a mistake. You could take a fingernail file and do this, but you could also cut the nut too low, and then you're in trouble and have to stick pieces of paper in there. So this is really something that probably you want to look at and evaluate, and if it is too high, take it to a repair person who has some idea of what they're doing.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like you to repair mine, and let's see. Can you see what he's doing, sir?
Mm-hmm.
These are fret files. They're gauged files. Sold, in this case, the ones we use are sold by Stuart McDonald, which is a great tool supply. There are other tool supplies. There's a company called Luthier's Mercantile, and there's other ones online. But this is really the...
Could a new bass player possibly attempt this, or would you recommend that they don't?
A person could watch this on YouTube and do it. It's probably something you want to practice, and the other thing is that you want to watch the right YouTube video, because I hate to take a dim view of what's going on, but there's much more misinformation than there is accurate information.
Okay.
And everybody thinks that they know what's going on, and actually it turns out that very few of them do.
All right. So look at this. You've been doing this a good minute. That's all.
Oh yeah. And we're not going to spend any time doing it. So now that's exactly where I want it.
Brilliant.
So now I have the truss rod adjusted correctly. I've got
Yes.
the nut height where I want.
Yes.
And then, even though you say you want the action lower than it was, what I'm going to let you do is play it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to decide, is this too low, or should we really bring the saddles up a little bit to compensate for what we did? And then
Okay.
once we've figured out what action you really wanted at, then we'll set the intonation. And we don't set the intonation until we get the action figured out, because when you play, you're stretching a string to push it down to the fret.
Correct.
And so you're really actually taking something that's, let's just say it's perfectly tuned to E. By the time you've pushed it down that far, you've stretched it a little bit. It's exactly the same thing as if you laid it on the fret and stretched it that far over.
Right.
You would see it on the tuner.
Okay.
And so we want to set the position of the bridges so that for an E string, that the E note itself, the fretted E note, lays over that fret itself.
And what do you call that procedure? What is that called?
Intonation.
Intonation of a bass. Okay.
I think that chord is hot behind you.
Alrighty. Here we go. And we'll give this Actually, I'm going to go back. I like to turn it up just a smidgen. Can you reach over for volume? I always like to tune louder because that means
better.
I don't have to pluck as hard.
We can also plug into the tuner, which would probably not be a bad idea, but
We will when we strobe,
okay.
when we intonate.
Okay.
I always like to tune by ear. I think it's my responsibility as a musician. I don't like to depend on. Wow. Feels better.
Is it too low?
Can I be honest? For me, it can never be too low. If you'll notice, my frets are very flat, which I'd ask for, but I have to be careful because I know I'll lose the ability to actually fret a note. But this is glorious. Just with a little stretch, a little truss rod twisting, and a little filing, this bass feels way better.
And can you feel the difference in the nut? I mean, we didn't do very much, but can you feel that it's slightly easier to play there?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so that's not too low for you.
No.
Okay.
And you notice I'm not.
Is it too high? Should it be lower, or should we just stay with? That's pretty low action, so.
I think this is glorious.
Okay, great.
It's low enough where I have just a little bit of relief, and yeah, I mean I can't get over it. It's just that little bit of nut filing and a little neck stretching.
Well, we lucked out so far. I want to loosen the screw that's holding this saddle in place, and then I'm going to move the saddle that direction because the note is flat.
Are you familiar with the Babbitt's bridge?
Yes.
Okay.
Very clever, and people like them. You know, here it takes about 6 months or a year before we like something. We want not only to like it ourselves, but we want to hear great things back from customers. So when it first came out, I mean, that's clever, but is it good? And I'm convinced now that it's clever and good.
Well, I think it's the best bass bridge I've ever put on in my instrument, and I was a badass bass bridge endorser for 30 years. Then when they went out of business, I coincidentally ran into Jeff Babbitt's, and when I put this on, it's even superior to that. I think it's the finest bass bridge I ever had on my instrument, period.
So I loosened this saddle and I'm moving it that direction.
Okay.
So I don't know about the righty-lefty thing, but if it's flat, you want to go that direction. If it's sharp, you want to come back.
Okay.
And I don't need to tighten it to test it, but right now I'm going to test it and see whether I went far enough or too far.
All right.
And when you're doing intonation, you don't have to be in tune. All you're trying to do is make sure that your open note and your note at the 12th fret and your note up the neck are in tune together.
I didn't know that. Sarah, could you film the tuner?
Yeah, this is
something I didn't know
this
till this
goes
minute.
under bad habits. Right now, when I'm setting the intonation, that's a little sharp in my open note, but I don't really. There's no point in me wasting my time if it's that sharp, because really all I want to do is compare that to the 12th fret note, make sure that they do all about the same, and then get pretty far up the neck so that I can see that wherever you play, you're going to be in tune.
I didn't know that. I always used to tune to right back to 0 and kept doing that. That's a new concept for me. I'm glad that.
I mean, it's nice, and
that.
if you're AC or ADHD or whatever it is,
Right.
It makes a difference. But in a way, for what we're doing, that kind of being that far out doesn't make a difference. If we were a half step off,
Yeah.
I would tune it. Now I'll go back and test it, and I want to make sure that the 1st fret, 12th fret, and the last fret are relatively close together, or at least as close as we can get them. Strings are not perfect, and so it might be a little sharp or a little flat here and there. And if I have a choice between being perfect everywhere, I'll split the difference between the 12th fret and the upper range. The old Nashville joke is that all the money's down here.
Yes.
Or as I forget who said it, Waylon Jennings or somebody said, bass is played down here, get above the 5th fret and you're fired. But the fact is it still makes a difference to be in tune up the neck.
I was going to say, there goes my Nashville studio career right there.
Well, so this one's a little bit flat too, so I loosen the saddle again, let this screw out a little bit, and then it's just slightly flat, so I don't think I'm going to have to move it very far. And one thing is that once I have it set where I want and tighten back down on both of these, on all these, I'm going to do something, which is I'm going to go back and tighten this truss rod, this intonation screw just a little bit, just so that nothing's sitting there rattling loose. Because you might have something rattling, it might even sound like it's up here and it's down here, or vice versa. So I always kind of try to make sure that nothing's loose, no springs are not kind of stretched out to the max, that they can be stretched out. These springs, for instance, right in here, if they get loose, they can get rattling. So if they are rattling, I'll take the saddle off, stretch the spring out, and put it back together again. And that's something a bass player can do at home just as easily. And I like where this one is. You know, it's a little flat at the 12th fret. It's a little sharp up there, and it's pretty much in tune with the first fret.
It surely is, yeah.
So I'm going to just make sure it's tight. Your touch is going to be different than mine. So even though we will do intonation for people in the shop, it's very important for you to know how to intonate your own instrument, because if you grab, like the bass player who was in here when you guys arrived today, he plays with 2 fingers and he pulls his strings really, really sharp. That's him.
Yes.
And there's no reason why he shouldn't be allowed to play however he wants to play.
Correct.
So just because I set the intonation with dainty hands doesn't mean that it's right for a customer or a player who grips hard. And there is no right and wrong in music.
Not in art. There certainly is not.
Now the only thing I'm worried about now is the fact that this pickup is awfully close to that string.
Which I use that way. I use it close as a hitting point. The only thing is that when it gets so close, perhaps the magnet causes that sort of resonant. The magnet pulls on the note, and I did a record called Taking Notes, and I had that problem. And if you listen to the bass solos and the bass lines, you'll and I didn't realize it till afterward, and it was because the pickup was so close. But I like it close because I like to use it as this sort of thing.
Right.
I see that I might lose that just.
Make sure that it's not too close for you, and if so, that's something you can adjust to your.
I would give it a half turn now. I felt it, and I agree with you. It's a little close. I could.
Pickups, as they go up and down, change their tonal character a little bit. So it never hurts to just experiment and listen to how something feels.
Yeah, that's it.
There's no right and wrong on pickup height either, but it does have quite an effect on the sound and in some cases the tuning. If you get particularly the one that's furthest from the bridge, if you get this pickup too close to the strings, and it's a high magnetic, these have no magnetic field. They're very, very low, being Bartolini's, but if they have a high magnetic field, strong magnetic field, they can pull the string slightly out of tune. So that's everything. I would consider this to be the clean bill of health.
I totally agree. I think these little tips are going to help all the guys. A little bit of truss rod. Perhaps they will take the experiment about filing a nut or going to a trained person to do it. There's a thing I want to mention about the nut element. In the event that anyone who attempts to do something for themselves possibly messes it up, it is easily fixable. There's little that a bass player might do except possibly overstressing a truss rod, which could break inside of the neck, and that's not a good thing. But even that's not common. But if someone wants to get the proper files that Joe had suggested, and file a little bit to attempt to figure it out. If somebody overdoes it and the bass is worse for the effort, just go to a guy like Mr. Glaser and go get it fixed. Bridge adjustment can be easily repaired. There's nothing that really anyone can do that is not reversible, and that's a very positive thing about home adjustment of a bass guitar. So
you're right, and in fact, if the nut gets a little low, putting a piece of paper underneath it, nicely cut and trimmed, and raising it up, starting over again, doesn't hurt anything. It's not audible. Nobody I've ever met could tell you whether there was a piece of paper underneath the nut or not. They can tell other things. They can tell whether there's a piece of paper under the bridge or a saddle on an acoustic guitar, but that is not one of the areas that is prone to sonic meddling.
Yeah, right. And I've seen sometimes guys do it. I've seen different times bass players. I'm trying to recall of guitarists, but I have seen bass players stick a little paper underneath. And
well,
so
sticking paper underneath the string will dampen the string a little bit, but if you have to knock the nut loose and put a piece of paper under it, raise it up just enough to get a clean sound, you have my blessing on it completely.
This is a marvelous job, an explanation for everybody, and I'm the beneficiary of it. That's what we say in New York quite a bit. And I have a bass that is beautiful to play. I have a bass.
Let's plug it in, and you can check the tuning for yourself, because your touch might be different, and there's that chord behind you. And the strap.
I do. I always use the strap. Just one easier way to hold a guitar, I feel, for me. There's something you said, and I will comment about it in this. Well, I'll do it really quickly. In art, you're right. In playing, you're right. There's no wrong way. There's no right way. Whatever. And I know this. I'm known in education to be rather there's a right way and a wrong way. But in the artful use of a bass, the manner that one plays, the action one chooses, the tone that one produces is personal. So in that manner of regarding how to play an instrument, there is no wrong way and no right way. And wow.
Even I think tuning isn't absolute. If you listen to Louis Armstrong, he sang sharp when he wanted to convey something. And it wasn't that he was an old man and he couldn't hear pitch. He added emotional value. Nice sounding bass.
It is. I mean, not through this amp, but
I can hear it through that. Of course, a nice sounding instrument is always the sound of the person playing it in their hands.
I'm in Nashville. I want to get in the studio. Joe Glaser made my bass sound good. And now I can't get hired. Bass guitar, and Joe Glaser made it a better playing instrument.
You know, you could go down to Broadway and set up a little amp and work right now.
Beautiful.
Great.
Pleasure and thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
The pleasure was mine.